I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos. And this month, we're going to be looking at a hidden auteur that was able to bring to vision the lives of all these eccentric men that can only be done by an eccentric man himself. I'm talking about Milos Forman. So, if you guys are new to the series, what I do is every single month, I break down a director's career and talk about 3 films that are really significant to his career, along with the central idea of what makes him great. Now, I know in my other Masters of Control episode, my previous one, William Wyler, we changed up the format. We're going to continue that format as well, going away from the best, favorite, and underrated into the 3 films that define their career, just because I found with a lot of me exploring these directors' careers for the very first time, the best and the favorite sometimes overlap too much, and the underrated is hard to pick out. So I really want to talk about the director's career instead of just talking about one movie, because I do a lot of preparation for these episodes. And in Milos Forman's case, he doesn't have a lot of movies, but his movies are very distinct, and they have a very interesting through line, and you could say they're of a piece in a sense. So it was really great to check out really almost all of his films, at least all the films I can really get my hands on. I really see how his career sort of changed and his influence in different parts of the world and different genres. He was very much an interesting man, and unfortunately he has passed away a couple of years ago now. So I thought, what better opportunity for me to talk about some of the great movies that he's made, as well as just look at his career. And I really found a lot going through it. So let's just jump right into it. What makes Milos Forman great? And to me, I really think that he's a hidden auteur. He's not one of these guys like Wes Anderson or David Fincher that has a distinct visual style, but he explores certain themes over and over again with all of his movies. They're different variations of almost the same story, but they are the same themes. That being the theme of a reckless man trying to go against society or a system or sort of institution of some sorts, and try to change it, and he sort of does it with reckless abandon and won't change. Sort of a person who is outcast from society for being different, and a lot of times, by sticking to their ground, really changes it or fails to change it. That's sort of the reckless man. It's very much an anti-establishment point of view. And I think Milos Forman got this sort of point of view growing up and sort of living in communist Czechoslovakia, which he was part of the Czechoslovakian New Wave, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But he's not one of those guys that has a distinct visual style. In a lot of ways, he's like Steven Spielberg in that sense, where he services the story he's telling. So if you look at something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that has a lot of sort of steady, still camera angles, but what he does is sort of create a great sort of claustrophobia, because there's sort of, from Jack Nicholson's character, Mick Murphy's character's point of view, he's feeling trapped within this institution. Whereas a movie like Amadeus, the camera is almost lyrical in the way that Amadeus is, and it sort of floats through scenes in a lot of ways. It's much more freer than the still cameras of, say, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or something like Fireman's Ball, where it's very up close and there's a lot of tight-ups, that's sort of the tight shots, and close-ups, because it allows to sort of make it seem like there's too many people in this room for this ball. So he's never sort of stuck to one sort of visual style. He can always change it up. He always does change it up. Hair feels like a musical, and The People versus Larry Flint, feels like a biopic. So he always does that. But the themes of his movies, you see them with almost every single one of his movies. And they're all about particularly men who are going against these sort of eccentric men, going against the establishment, going against what's norm, and trying to change that, and sort of not bowing down to what they are. Well, there's always these fascinating protagonists he's able to grab from history, whether it be Larry Flint or Andy Kaufman or Mozart or some of the other ones he has created. I think that a common misconception is that, Man on the Moon is an Andy Kaufman picture, or Amadeus is a Mozart picture. Yes, their titles are in the name, or even The People versus Larry Flint, but really there's a great ensemble within these movies, and because of these themes that occur, we see a lot of the similar characters and similar ensembles of the films. You always have your main eccentric man. He's so in one way one-dimensional. He has a set of beliefs. He's not going to change. He's not going to sort of kneel down to anybody. He's going to try to do what he wants, and will continue to do what he wants, and we'll sort of make fun of that. He's always normally wise and smart, but definitely reckless and not a fan of the rules. And then there's always you think you're Andy Kaufman's on Man on the Moon, your People versus Larry Flint, and the People versus Larry Flint. Your Burgers and Hair, for example. But then there's always that support system that really grounds the character, that was there from the beginning and really humbles them, which is very needed to that sort of eccentric sort of craziness. You need that balance, that yin and that yang. Think Constance Moser, think Athea Flint from People vs. Larry Flint. Now these characters aren't always the best characters or the best people for those characters. They may be flawed themselves. But as a pair, they work very well together. And really, you see those characters. There's the support system, there's the eccentric man, and then there's all these different sort of side characters that, even something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is so crucial, because Danny DeVito's character, Martini, I think his name was, different from Billy, right? Or different from Christopher Lloyd's character. They all have very distinct visuals, even though they may not visual faces, they may not say a lot. He does a great job in the casting, and does a great job sort of fleshing out those rules, or Chief, for example, so that the eccentric man is very much balanced by the world around him, showing that he's not just a lonely man going up against a lot of things. In a lot of ways, he gains allies along the way, and we care just for this much about the allies. So I think that even he follows a similar theme throughout a lot of his movies. What makes him great is that he explores that theme in so many different types of ways, and he knows how to work that theme with balancing the main character, and then also with that support system. And another thing I want to mention is actually how throughout the career, I think he's gained more sympathy for these characters. Something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it is almost seemingly like a man screaming against a mountaintop with no success. But then something like The People vs. Larry Flint, he's able to change the world and change the First Amendment, really sort of, and freedom, and really protect that. So I think he does gain more sympathy for these characters later on, which is sort of emblematic of the times. The 70s were sort of more pessimistic in that sense versus, say, the 90s. So we see his career sort of evolve. It's not the same movie over and over again with different people. He does have some sort of more sympathy. Some are true stories. The camera's always different. Sort of the setting can be different. So I don't want to make it seem like he's making the same movie over and over again. But you can tell, like a lot of directors, like a Tim Burton, where you can see his obsession with outsiderness in a movie like Frankenweenie, or the short Frankenweenie, excuse me. Early on in these directors' career, Christopher Nolan and his obsession with people being obsessed, or his interest in complex storytelling. You see that in Memento right away. So you see with a lot of directors what they are going to do for the rest of their career, what they're interested at the beginning, and then it's almost different variations on that. I think Forman was able to pull that off really well. And the last thing I do want to mention is how brave Forman was in terms of making the correct choices in regards to storytelling, and how he always risked his storytelling techniques. What I loved about him is that he always tried different things. Fireman's Balls takes place in one night. The People vs. Larry Flint was a biopic that really hadn't been done before, where it looked at just a certain slice of Larry Flint's life, which was these court cases. They really didn't look as much at the business and how he became successful. Just that he took a bunch of pictures of girls, and he put it in a magazine. There wasn't any behind the scenes. It was him defending his right to put that magazine into the world. That was the sort of slice of life aspect that they really nailed in on, which was something different at the time. Or something like Goya's Ghost, which I don't think works that well, but really focuses on a setting, and then looks at the characters and the decades that almost go through it, and sort of the interactions that they come. And sort of years and years and years later, someone will leave, then someone will come back, and sort of from that perspective, for Francisco Goya, it's not necessarily successful, but it's very unique and very different, and adds to a unique pace of the film. That I think, if few directors would even try. He's always trying to test the limits of storytelling, test what an audience is capable of understanding. So I really condemn him for his great sort of risk and sort of confidence in taking those risks for different storytelling, as well as creating an overall theme and really servicing that story justly, so that the theme is not just the same movie over and over again. It's different movies with different performances and different messages, almost in a lot of times, different results because of those actions by those men. I think he's a very fascinating director in that sense, where it's not hard to point down, it's hard to point down sort of a visual style, but when you watch his movies like I did it back to back to back, you see the common through line, and you realize, how well he is at conveying the story and how interesting the story ultimately is. But let's move over into sort of his first big movie, and what I think is one of his three most important films that explain him, which is The Fireman's Ball. This was a film I knew really nothing about. It was a movie that was available and part of Forman's career, so I thought I'd seek it out, check it out, and I'm very happy I did, because really I knew that you could have easily done three of Milos Forman's sort of American films, one from the 70s, one from the 80s, one from the 90s, but I think it'd be doing a disservice to really his legacy to discredit what he did for the Czech New Wave and Czechoslovakian film. Because as I really look back into the backstory, the film had a very rich backstory. That being sort of the, like I said, the Czechoslovakian New Wave. Now every country seemingly has their own New Wave, is what I'm discovering at least, with the French being the most popular. However, the French was to do with, sort of mediocrity of the movies of the day, which is why these people sort of tried to challenge themselves to make artistic films. Czechoslovakian New Wave was very different. It was almost pretty much like a political sort of upheaval. If you don't know, during Czechoslovakia, when it was still a country, in the 60s, there was a communist regime that was in place. And a lot of these young filmmakers sort of going against it were making films in the 60s that were criticisms of the Communist Party, sort of satires, and they got pretty successful. The Czechoslovakia was different than sort of other communist countries and sort of poor at sort of silencing public opinion. They were pretty sort of oblivious that way, and a lot of these filmmakers, people like Vera Shtimel, I don't know how to say that, or Jaromír Jágr, these young filmmakers, along with Milos Forman, they were able to create these amazing films in this period of time of oppression. And it wasn't actually until really this film, as almost an accumulation of everything, that the communist regime sort of really took a hammer down onto this movie, because after this movie was released, only a couple weeks later, the Communist Party removed it and censored it, and the movie wasn't even been able to be seen for years to come, because it was censored by the Communist Party. And this sort of really marked a change in the Communist Party of that time. It was before, they allowed things to happen, but now they had sort of a new leadership, and they were really focused on making sure that they stick to this, and they weren't going to do it lackadaisically in that sense. So after this film came out, they censored it, they started censoring other things, and because of this new sort of militarization, a lot of these filmmakers were, including Milos Forman, was in fear for his life, and fear for imprisonment. So they ended up fleeing Milos Forman to the States, where he continued his sort of state-long journey. People were fans of Milos's work before, because he did The Loves of the Blonde or Black Peter, which tackles similar themes. So he's a very fascinating and a pivotal director of the Czech New Wave, a new wave I wasn't familiar with, but I may check out, because The Fireman's Ball was an excellent movie. I really enjoyed it. And if you don't know, it's about a ball, sort of an event run by a group of volunteer firemen, and everything that can go wrong does go wrong. There was sort of a forced pageant that sort of goes out of hand, and there's a fire that happens, there's a raffle that happens, and there's sort of an old senile man, and it's very much a satire, and I think it's very much a comedy and sort of a criticism of the communist regime, and sort of or really just men in power, sort of the idiocy of just that these are human beings in that sense, and they don't know what's going on, and it's out of control, and you can't sort of control the masses, you can't sort of control the people. And a lot of times, foreign comedies, sometimes it's hard for them to translate because of certain humor, or you have to read the subtitles, so the timing doesn't work as well. But thankfully, this one does, and I think that's because Forman relies a lot of times on silent film techniques. Things like when the volunteer men are sort of chasing the girls around when they're not going to come to the pageant, or the men shoveling snow onto the fire as the man just watches his house burn down. there is a lot of sort of absurdist humor as well as physical humor, like when the guy sort of looks underneath the table and he sees, the couple underneath. These little sort of gags that really broaden the appeal. And then there's also the craft that comes into it. Forman used not actors, sort of real life people, not professional actors, to create the film and give it a real naturalistic vibe. I mean, these volunteer firemen feel like real people. They have unique faces, and even their acting style is sort of an odd cadence because they don't know how to act in sort of maybe the traditional way. It gives them an even more enhanced effect because they're sort of stumbling over their words sometimes, and then these people are also stumbling. The firemen in the film are stumbling and can't get a grasp and a control of everything that's going on. And then sort of the camera work, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, of how it's almost handheld. It's very claustrophobic. There's too many people clearly in this place. At least it makes you feel like that you're always sort of shimmering through, you're bumping into people. It has that feeling throughout the entire film, throughout this entire night, and really it's brilliant in tackling these themes of people in greed and the people in power, sort of senile in the sense of the chairman, and then sort of there's the young people and their recklessness and how they can't really be stopped by these old men who are trying to control things, but they can't. I think it's very brilliant. It's very funny. It's very obviously satirized, but it's also really a well done, well crafted movie. Really every aspect, I think, plays and enhances the story even better with its using the actors, with its sort of the visual style of the film, with some of the sort of absurdist physical humor that they're able to achieve. It's very well done in that sense, and I think Forman really is firing on all cylinders here, and I highly recommend sort of a great satire of the Communist Party or just men in power in general, and the recklessness of young people in that sense. And I connected to it. I thought it was very funny. I think it's one of those movies where I recommend to a lot of people, if you have seen some of his other movies, check out this one, because it's not only is it vital to his career, but it's also, I think, a great movie. And the next movie I'm going to talk about is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I had to talk about it because it's, I think, the director's most influential film. I think it's the director's most known film. I think it's the director's most accessible film. And by not talking about it, I think I'd be removing a lot of people's connection to Milos Forman. So, even though I enjoy the movie quite a bit, it's not one of my favorite Milos Forman films. That's actually coming up next, and I think you may know what it is. I just had to talk about it because I think it's a fantastic movie and really Forman firing on all cylinders in this way. And actually, despite it being in a hospital, it's the perfect 70s movie because it sort of encapsulates the sort of cynicism and the rebelliousness and sort of the recklessness and the sort of pessimism almost and cynicism of the 70s. That sort of, even though it's in a hospital, doesn't have really the setting of it, the characters really enhance that. And actually, this was one of the few movies that won the Big Five in terms of the Big Five Oscars. The Best Picture, Best Director, Best Writing, Actor and Actress. Those are the Big Five. And I think it Silence of the Lambs and It Happened One Night were the other two to do so. And what's interesting about that is that actually this movie was number 3 at the box office that year. It was a massive breakout hit. And, back in the day, they didn't have Best Popular Picture, sort of how audience tastes have changed over the years, I guess you can say. It's kind of interesting to go back. And just the ideas that the film portrays, I think, are very accessible and very easy for people to latch onto. I think a very interesting topic, which makes it very easy for people to really enjoy it. The idea of the price we pay for freedom, and our institutions, well equipped for this sort of behavior. Are these people the crazy ones? If not, there's a movie Unsane, which Steven Soderbergh does, which really sort of tackles into the fear of being trapped in a hospital. You don't want to be. This is sort of a great mix of comedy and drama, which is why I think the well-developed characters of both. There's well-developed characters and well-written characters, and then the performances the actors portray from pretty much everyone are top-notch and outstanding. You have the protagonist, Randall McMurphy, played by Jack Nicholson, and he's really complex because sometimes he goes in there and he wants to leave right away, but then he sort of gets used to it and sort of makes light of it in some sense, and then tries to rally the guys to help him get out of there. like I said, it's in a brilliant mix between comedy and drama, and Jack Nicholson plays it beautifully, because sometimes you really feel heartbroken for him being, stuck in this place, but other times he's making quips with some of the guys and sort of trying to rally them against each other. So because he's our protagonist, we sort of almost are part of the group and want to rally against it. And the film is great that way in manipulating your viewpoint. Because we're sort of part of the group of the mental patients, we see the institution as the problem. We're trying to rally against it. Once again, this theme that Forman portrays, and then he really nails, I think, the summer camp aspect of the film, where the sort of mental the group therapy sessions that they have so many different unique characters, like I mentioned at the top of the show, Stuttering Billy or Martini or Chief, these great actors that are able to create these really interesting roles, and that they may seem one-dimensional at front, but they may have different things going on, as our protagonist Randall McMurphy really sort of goes in and interact. Some people call him Mac, some say Randall, but really I think maybe the most interesting and most complex character, I guess you would say, is Nurse Ratched, who is just you constantly question at least her motives and her intentions, what sort of gives the sense of intrigue and thrill throughout the entire movie, because one viewing you'll watch it and you'll be like, oh my god, she's a complete sadist. In another film, you maybe start to sympathize with her, like, she's just a woman, a professional trying to do the best she can. It's conflicting morals. Maybe you feel one way and you've never felt the other, but I recommend rewatching it, because I think this movie is very rewatchable, because there's that complex, sort of interesting, morally ambiguous character of Nurse Ratched, and really the institution as a whole, and then there's the very just easy sort of funny moments of Jack Nicholson, which gets you in, but then there's really these heartbreaking moments that you forget about sometimes, that really sort of remind you of the terrible situation that this guy is in, and then he's just sort of he's very confident, and he's very witty, and he's very funny, and sort of eccentric. And I say this, sort of break down and question the rules, because, how do you know I'm not crazy? Why am I here? How can I prove to you I'm not crazy? Is it just because I'm reckless that I'm crazy? It's sort of like questioning the institution, that maybe, and just how I love how the film manipulates you in a way that it questions your thought as to, wait, is the mental people the smart ones? Are they the right ones? It's almost like you hear stories of people who hang out with, schizophrenic people. After a while, they sort of almost see their side. They're like, oh yeah. And then they have to take themselves out of it, because it's like, this is not the sort of healthy way of thinking. And I think Forman does an incredible job really immersing us in this world, and really using film really could only be done as a film, because he uses this medium to sort of manipulate your point of view in a beautiful way. That I think it's just a great Forman film, firing in all sense. Maybe Jack Nicholson's best performance. He's really just incredible in here. Highs and lows of the film. And it's one that's very accessible. I think that maybe you should start with this one, because it is maybe the most accessible one, but it's also just a fantastic movie. But we're going to talk about the film, which I really wanted to make this episode for. It is my favorite Milos Forman film, and I'll take any chance to talk about it, which is Amadeus. So while I'll take any opportunity to talk about Amadeus, I do think it fits really well into the director's career. It talks about and sort of represents his obsession with period pieces in films like Valmont or Goya's Ghosts, and even his obsession with biopics later on with Man on the Moon or People vs. Larry Flint. But what makes the film special is that it's not about Mozart. It's kind of, I know it's based on a play, but I can only see it being a film because of the camera movements, and because of sort of the grandiose nature and the amazing performances that are different from the play. But really, what makes it special is that you're making a movie, and the sort of boldness of the movie is that it's called Amadeus, of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Everyone knows who Mozart is, but Mozart's not really the protagonist. It's really from the perspective of Salieri, who's another composer played by F. Murray Abraham. At the time, sort of a rivaling composer. However, everyone knows Mozart and no one knows Salieri. But it's a brilliant move, because what it's able to do is make everyone else sympathize with Salieri, because Salieri is envious and sees the genius of Mozart. It allows the Mozart symbol of Mozart almost to be preserved in that sense, because everyone knows Mozart is a genius. Seeing him in the film, it's like, oh, so obvious he's a genius. However, it would be almost hard to sympathize with him because everyone in the audience is mediocre. They're not a genius, right? That's why Salieri is the best one, because we can see his brilliance, but we sort of envy it because he's not that. But at the same time, I think Forman does a great job at really criticizing Mozart. Mozart comes in almost from a 21st century perspective and starts criticizing the world, which is very funny, but then the film doesn't pull any punches when criticizing Mozart. I mean, he's immature, he's irresponsible, he's a rich kid who was told he's great, and he knows it, and he's spoiled in that way. And Salieri sort of has done everything right, which is, I think, something that I really latched onto. I think a lot of people can latch onto, as most people aren't these sort of amazing auteurs or amazing, brilliant people, is that Salieri is devoted his life to music. He's an amazing musician, but in comparison to Mozart, he's nothing. And I think that, Mozart is completely himself, which is sort of the charm of the movie. I mentioned at the top the sort of brilliant sort of camera work that is able to go throughout the movie, and it really has a lyrical sort of a floating aspect to it, which gives the breadth of amazing sort of cinematography and amazing movements as it sort of just floats through his shots. There's still cameras of Mozart from the back composing, or these lavish sets. And what I think the film really does is, by creating the sort of ordinary or sort of mediocre character in Salieri, despite him being so fantastic, he's mediocre in comparison to Mozart. It allows the audience to sympathize with Salieri, but also allows us to gain a sort of great glimpse and really immerse us in this world. A lot of fantasy movies do this really well. Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, where you get a guy like Harry Potter who is very much an ordinary guy. He was just going to school. He didn't even know he was a wizard, and then we get launched into this world, and he's just a great audience conduit for those first few movies. And I think they do a great job here, where Salieri is sort of our audience conduit into this world of what era is it? It's not the Baroque, classical, I guess you could say the classical period. Just the incredible architecture, the paintings. It feels like a painting. It drips that sort of that architecture, and just lavish sets and costumes. I mean, it's a production, if you use a term like that. And it's beautiful just looking at it. And how can I not even mention the score of the film? I first saw this with a live orchestra at the time, and it was amazing at that time as well. And I've seen it since, and every time I rewatch the movie, I get obsessed with Mozart's music for at least a week. I mean, the music really does great jobs and uses Mozart's music because he has a breadth of music to enhance the movie. Sometimes it's grandiose and large, and it makes it feel like the movie is an epic. But other times it's small and subtle and builds in a really beautiful way, really accumulating, I think, in the best scene in one of the best scenes in movie history, the best scene in the movie, one of the best scenes in movie history, where you have Salieri getting a glimpse into Mozart's process. I mean, the entire movie, he's trying to look into Mozart's notes, and they're just taking a glimpse of look, and Mozart's very protective of it, and even when he does look, how is this possible? There are no mistakes, he doesn't cross things out, he writes it and goes. But the brilliance of the scene is him writing it down as Mozart's dying. The film implies that he killed him because of envy, and then Mozart is dying of sickness, and he just tries to get everything out of him, his last sort of symphony in that sense. And we see Salieri's just a glimpse of brilliance as he sees it, and as Mozart's explaining it, it's more rousing than any sports movie I've ever seen. And Forman does it by a guy lying in a bed and Salieri writing Mozart's last symphony, and we hear Mozart explaining it with an incredible amount of passion, and in the background it builds, and he says, and you hear the trumpets, and then we hear the trumpets, and this builds, and we hear him sort of thinking about it in his head, and we almost get a glimpse as we are Salieri into his head, and we hear it all come together, and Salieri's like, oh, I can't believe this, of course this works, of course, you're right, and he's just writing it down, and he's so engaged, and that's sort of the best part of the movie. Is Salieri, is that push and pull between love and hate, because he's a genius, and we realize that, and Salieri is the only one who recognizes him. So at times we hate Mozart for sort of throwing away his gift, for sort of nonchalantly sort of playing it recklessly and sort of doing stuff sort of off the key. and not preparing, and sort of treating people with disrespect. But other times, we really feel for Mozart, because in the time, in how the film sort of portrays it, Salieri was just as respected as Mozart, if not more. And Mozart, a lot of times, he makes this great grand symphony, puts his life on the work, and then the King of Austria gives him, I think it's Austria, gives him the note of, there's too many notes. It's like, what does that mean? It's that struggle of you feel for Mozart sometimes, and then you hate him at other times. That brilliant push and pull, and that sort of that conflicted nature of Salieri, because he loves him clearly, not in a sort of a platonic way, just in an admiration kind of a way. But other times, he hates that he's not him, that he's dedicated his entire life, he's done everything right, and still he's not going to be Mozart. It's heartbreaking, it's brilliant, and I mean, how can I haven't even mentioned the brilliant performances? I mean, Tom Hulce as Mozart plays the brilliance of the struggle versus the immaturity, and they have and really can turn on like a switch, because he really is passionate about his music. You can tell he just wants to do what he wants because it's fun that way, and he's eccentric and he's very funny and just fun to be around. And then you have Constance Mozart, played by Elizabeth Berridge, who's really great as a support system, and really almost plays the heart of Mozart. And then you have F. Murray Abraham, who gives that stage performance and sort of the grandioseness and the sort of respect and the honor that Salieri has, and how he portrays that sort of the front to his peers, but really we see him as he just slowly envies and hates and builds a hatred for Mozart, even though he admires him so great deeply. It's a brilliant, complex character, and it's a classical character with a classical time period, and makes us sympathize for him because we are him. And then at the end, as he's telling his story in the old age home, and he's just blessing everyone. He's the saint of mediocrity. It's just a brilliant film that, even though it's 3 hours, even though it isn't the most accessible, I think it might be his best, because it's, the craft of it all, the production design is top notch from everything. The way Forman tells the story immerses you in the world. The way he makes you sympathize with these characters. The way he tells the story of something most people didn't know about. I didn't know that Mozart was this childish man, and Salieri, I never even heard of this guy, but he was sort of a rival at the time. It's just a fascinating story, and a brilliant sort of back and forth with some amazing, rousing moments and great music, and I can't say anything more highly of it. There's not a frame I would change. Even though it's 3 hours long, I still would keep it the way it is. I think I'd recommend it to everyone. I know there's different cuts, I believe. Anyone's fine. I think for me, it's similar to The Lord of the Rings, where it's just more. I don't think it ruins the pace of it, because it is just sort of beautifully shot and lyrical, in the sense where you don't mind sitting down for this, because it's an epic, it's something that's grandiose, and it's going to cover the life of Mozart, and that it's really just a fascinating character study at the end of the day of these two people, and really tackling beautiful topics like envy. I may have run a little bit long, guys, but I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Let me know some of your favorite Milos Forman films, and next month I plan on doing Peter Weir, which will be the last Masters of Controlled Chaos episode for that month. I'll be continuing doing the podcast as of now, and then I'll be transitioning into, I'll be doing Old on Old every single week as well, and then I'll be doing I plan on doing, old Oscar countdown for the Oscar season. That should be a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this series. I like the format of what we've been doing. Let me know if you have any complaints, comments, concerns. Let me know in the comments down below. That always helps. And until next time, stay tuned.